So every single time you feel a pang of guilt or, that sudden sinking anxiety that you aren't fundamentally good enough, you're actually just upholding a contract.
Yeah, a legally binding psychological contract.
Right. And it's one that you signed before you even knew how to speak.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is.
Yeah.
For today, we are basically tearing up that paperwork. I want you to just imagine stepping out of your front door tomorrow morning and realizing that you are completely functionally immune to other people.
Like a superpower.
Exactly. A reality where absolutely nothing anyone says to you can hijack your nervous system.
Yeah.
Where your own mind, which, for so many of us is this exhausting battlefield of doubt and self-judgment, it just suddenly goes quiet.
It sounds kind of impossible, right? Like an inaccessible superpower, or maybe the result of, I don't know, retreating to a monastery for 30 years.
Yeah, most people would assume that.
But the framework we are unpacking in this deep dive proposes that this state of absolute psychological freedom isn't something you have to grind for decades to earn. It's actually something you remember.
I love that distinction.
Yeah, we're looking at a system rooted in ancient Toltec wisdom, which was popularized by Don Miguel Ruiz in his book, The Four Agreements. And it basically takes these incredibly dense, complex spiritual and psychological realities and distills them down into 4 behavioral rules.
And we're going really deep into this specific philosophy today because it challenges, well, absolutely everything you believe about your identity.
Oh, entirely.
The nature of truth, and specifically the mechanics of why you suffer. Because if you're listening to this, you're likely navigating an era of just unprecedented information overload.
The noise is constant.
It is. We all walk around with this baseline hum of constant anxiety, and, we want to filter for that noise. So this isn't just abstract sit on a mountaintop theory.
Yeah, it's highly practical.
Yeah, it's a day-to-day behavioral operating system designed to help you stop living your life by default, which, let's be honest, usually means living by fear.
Absolutely.
And start living entirely by design.
But to write new code, you have to understand the operating system that is currently running on your hardware and often crashing it.
Right, the system failure.
Exactly. We have to look at the agreements you have already made. Ruiz introduces this foundational premise that human beings are born into what he calls the dream.
And he's not talking about REM sleep here.
No, he's talking about a massive, collective, shared hallucination. It's a highly structured illusion shaped by your family, your religion, your schools, and just your broader culture.
So the idea is that the literal moment you take your first breath, you are dropped into a pre-existing matrix of rules that you had absolutely no say in creating.
Zero say. And the training begins immediately. He calls this training process domestication.
Domestication. It's an uncomfortable word.
Very uncomfortable because we associate it with house training a pet, right? But biologically and psychologically, it is incredibly accurate.
How so?
Well, think about human evolutionary biology for a second. Unlike a horse that can, stand up and run a few hours after birth, a human infant is utterly, hopelessly defenseless for years.
Yeah, just completely dependent.
Right. For an early human, being rejected by the tribe or the family unit didn't just mean hurt feelings. I mean, it meant literal physical death by starvation or predation.
So we are basically biologically hardwired to view rejection as a mortal threat.
Precisely. Because of that immense vulnerability, human children are exquisitely sensitive to the system of reward and punishment used by their parents and by society.
Yeah, have to be.
Right. If you behave according to the arbitrary rules of your specific family, you get rewarded with attention, praise, love. You feel safe.
And if you break the rules,
you are punished with the withdrawal of that attention. You get scolded, ignored, shamed. And your nervous system, it interprets that withdrawal of love as a direct threat to your survival.
Wow. So a child doesn't have the cognitive filter to say, well, my dad is just stressed from work today, so I won't internalize his yelling.
No, they can't do that.
The child just absorbs it as absolute, concrete truth. Like if the parent says, you're too loud, stop taking up so much space, the child forms an agreement.
Right.
They say, okay, my natural voice is bad. Taking up space makes me unlovable.
And that is an agreement being forged in the absolute fire of survival instinct. You adopt beliefs about who you are, what is right or wrong, and what makes you worthy of existing.
It's heavy.
It is. And the real tragedy of the human condition, according to this framework, isn't just that we are conditioned. Because, all social mammals are conditioned.
Sure.
The tragedy is that the vast majority of these inherited beliefs, the rules about your worth, your intelligence, your physical appearance, they are completely arbitrary and objectively false.
But they feel so real.
Because they were installed when you were desperately dependent, so they harden into concrete. They become the invisible architecture of your entire adult reality.
You know, it makes me think of buying a pristine, state-of-the-art smartphone.
Okay, I like this.
The hardware is completely flawless. But the second you turn it on, before you can even touch the screen, it connects to a network and forces a massive, mandatory operating system update.
Oh, exactly.
It downloads all this legacy code, all these buggy apps, restrictions from previous generations. So you're walking around running an OS you never chose, written by developers you never even met.
And those developers, meaning your parents, your teachers, they were running legacy code forced upon them by their parents.
Just a cascading glitch.
Yeah. It's an unbroken generational chain of buggy software. And if you extrapolate this into modern society, it explains a massive paradox.
Which is?
It explains why you can look at highly successful people, CEOs, award-winning artists, millionaires who have ostensibly won the game of the collective dream and find that they are completely miserable.
Oh, right. Imposter syndrome, burnout.
Exactly. Chronic anxiety, depression. Their external reality looks totally victorious, but their internal operating system is still running that early childhood code that says, you aren't quite enough yet. You still have to earn your right to be loved.
Because the foundation of the dream is just fear.
Pure fear.
But hold on, let me push back a little here. If this dream, this collective rule book, is just society's way of maintaining order, isn't some level of domestication kind of necessary?
How do you mean?
I mean, we need to agree that a red light means stop. We need to agree that stealing from our neighbors is bad. If we don't have this shared conditioned rule book, don't we just have pure anarchy?
That's a really fair question, but there is a critical distinction between social cooperation and internalizing false worth.
Okay, unpack that.
Agreeing that a red light means stop is a functional agreement for physical survival and community cohesion. The domestication Ruiz is warning against isn't about ignoring traffic laws or basic ethics.
Right, he's not advocating for crime.
No, not at all. It's about the psychological and emotional conditioning that ties your innate human value to external metrics.
Got it.
It's the difference between stealing harms the community and I failed a math test, therefore I am a fundamental failure of a human being.
Wow, yeah. Huge difference.
The former is a social contract. The latter is a toxic agreement that causes internal suffering.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. We are talking about the internal architecture of self-worth. So if our internal operating system was fundamentally programmed by the words of our parents and teachers, the only way to reprogram it is to take control of that exact same tool.
Exactly. Language.
We have to look at how we are wielding language right now, which brings us to the first agreement. And this is framed as the most powerful, but absolutely the most difficult to master, which is be impeccable with your word.
The depth of this agreement is just staggering once you look past the surface. We really have to dissect the word impeccable here.
Let's do it.
Etymologically, it comes from the Latin roots peccatus, meaning sin, and meaning without. So literally, without sin.
Without sin. Which sounds very religious.
It does, but in this framework, sin has absolutely nothing to do with offending a deity or breaking a religious dogma. A sin is anything you do that goes against yourself.
Wait, really? So anytime you judge yourself, blame yourself, or reject yourself, you are actively sinning against yourself.
Yes. To be impeccable with your word means you fiercely refuse to use language to harm yourself. And by extension, you refuse to use it to harm others.
You speak with absolute integrity.
Exactly. You recognize that words are not just passive, descriptive labels we slap onto the world. Words are literal, active tools of creation.
They build reality.
They have the power to construct confidence from nothing, or to completely decimate a person's identity.
It's almost like casting a spell. I mean, if someone wakes up, looks in the mirror, and mutters, "Ugh, I look so old, I'm so stupid, I'm going to totally mess up this presentation today," they probably think they're just blowing off steam.
Right, just venting.
But they are actually issuing a command to their own neurobiology.
They are reinforcing a toxic agreement. The human brain operates on the instructions it receives. When you speak that way, that thought operates as a self-fulfilling prophecy.
You're programming the machine.
You are literally instructing your nervous system to act out the reality of being incompetent. You will carry yourself differently. Your cortisol levels will spike. Your baseline anxiety will rise.
And this destructive power extends outward too, right?
Oh, absolutely. The framework specifically highlights gossip, and it refers to it as emotional poison.
Gossip as a social computer virus.
That is the perfect analogy. When you gossip about a coworker, you are injecting emotional poison into the listener. You are deliberately altering their perception of a third party, almost always based on your own unverified fears or ego.
It's so casual, though. People do it at the water cooler every day.
They do, but the critical mechanism here is that the poison infects the carrier first. You cannot handle toxic waste without it getting into your own bloodstream. The sheer energetic effort of tearing someone else down inherently lowers your own baseline of peace. You are actively participating in the fear-based dream.
There's a really practical discipline triad introduced to counter this, a way to filter things.
Right, the 3 gates.
Before speaking, you filter your words through 3 gates. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind?
Simple but brutal.
Honestly, if you actually applied this to every text message, every email, every Slack channel conversation, the world would probably go completely silent for a month.
It would fundamentally alter the landscape of human interaction because so much of our daily communication is just nervous filler.
Totally.
It's fueled by anxiety, a desire to bond over shared negativity, or, a need to inflate our own status by diminishing someone else's.
Well, let's apply this to a real-world scenario, like a high-stakes, fast-paced work environment. Let's say you're a manager and an employee is consistently dropping the ball, and it's costing the company money. If you have to filter your feedback through, is it necessary and is it kind? Doesn't that just lead to a culture of toxic positivity where no one ever gets corrected? I mean, how do you deliver harsh, critical reality while remaining impeccable?
It's a great point, but the trap there is equating kindness or impeccability with conflict avoidance.
Okay.
Being impeccable with your word does not mean being artificially sweet or hiding objective reality. Remember the first gate, is it true?
Right.
If the employee is failing, the truth is that they are failing. The impeccability lies entirely in the delivery of that truth.
So how does an impeccable manager handle it?
An impeccable manager sits down and says, the data shows this project is 30% behind schedule, the client is unhappy, and your current workflow is not functioning. We need to overhaul your approach immediately.
Because that is true, it is obviously necessary to fix the problem, and it is fundamentally kind because it provides clear, actionable reality without attacking their humanity.
Exactly. Now contrast that with a manager who isn't impeccable, who says, you're so lazy, you're dragging the whole department down. What is wrong with you?
Yeah, that feels completely different.
The first addresses a behavioral reality without sinning against the person. The second is a direct assault on their identity. It's casting a dark spell.
And those spells last.
They do. A single careless sentence like that from an authority figure can alter a person's self-worth for decades. I mean, we can all remember something cruel a teacher or a boss said to us 20 years ago that still stings.
Oh, absolutely. I still remember a comment a math teacher made in 7th grade.
Right. That is the terrifying power of language. And it's why being impeccable is the absolute foundation of this entire philosophy.
Okay, so we commit to the first agreement. We rigorously filter our words. We stop the self-deprecating humor. We stop gossiping. We communicate with candor and integrity.
That's the goal.
But that immediately exposes a massive vulnerability. We can lock down our own words, but we live in a world with 8 billion other people, the vast majority of whom are entirely domesticated and constantly hurling emotional poison in every direction.
A very toxic environment.
So if we are walking around open and impeccable, how do we survive the collateral damage of everyone else's toxic words?
And that profound vulnerability is the exact mechanism that necessitates the second agreement, which is don't take anything personally.
Don't take anything personally.
If the first agreement governs what you project outward, the second agreement governs what you allow inward. It is the ultimate psychological shield.
And it's designed to dismantle emotional suffering at its absolute root.
Yes. The premise here is a massive counterintuitive paradigm shift. It argues that nothing other people do is because of you. Absolutely nothing.
Nothing. That feels impossible to believe.
It's hard, but it's true. It is entirely driven by their own beliefs, their own fears, and their own conditioning.
To understand why this is so difficult, I think we have to look at how inherently egocentric human beings are.
Oh, we are very self-centered.
From childhood, we are wired to believe that we are the absolute center of the universe. In psychology, there's a concept closely related to this called the spotlight effect.
Right, where you feel like everyone is watching you.
Exactly. It's the phenomenon where people tend to believe they're being noticed, judged, and scrutinized by others far more than they actually are. We are biologically predisposed to monitor our social standing because, again, in a tribal setting, status equals survival.
Yes.
So if someone cuts us off in traffic, our immediate primal thought is, they disrespected me. If a partner is quiet at dinner, we think, what did I do wrong?
We're constantly interpreting the external world as a direct reaction to our existence, but the second agreement shatters that narcissistic illusion.
It forces you to step out of the center.
It demands that you realize that when someone criticizes you, insults you, or even praises you extravagantly, it is a reflection of their inner world. It is not a measure of your value.
Give me an example of how that works practically.
Okay, let's say a stranger on the internet leaves a vicious comment on something you created, calling you incompetent and useless. If you take that personally, you are subconsciously agreeing with them.
Wow.
You are silently saying, maybe they are right. Maybe I am useless. And the very second you agree, their emotional poison enters your system.
So taking it personally is literally voluntarily handing the remote control of your emotional state to a total stranger.
Yes. It only hurts if you already secretly harbor the fear that the insult is true.
That's a tough pill to swallow.
It is. If someone walks up to you and calls you a purple elephant, you don't get offended. You just think they are crazy because you have absolute certainty that you are not a purple elephant.
Right, it doesn't even compute as an insult.
But if they call you stupid and it hurts, it's because part of your domestication still believes you might be stupid.
You know, it's like everyone is walking through life wearing their own deeply customized virtual reality headset.
I love that visual.
Right. Each headset is rendering a completely different movie,
Yeah.
programmed by that specific person's childhood traumas, their fears, their specific cultural domestication.
That's exactly.
So if someone wearing their VR headset suddenly turns and starts screaming at me, they aren't actually seeing the real me. They are yelling at a rendered character that only exists inside their headset.
That is exactly what is happening. They are projecting an image onto you and then reacting emotionally to their own projection. So why on earth would you take it personally?
It logically has nothing to do with me.
Nothing. And when you truly internalize this, it fundamentally rewires how you view human cruelty.
How so? How does it change the reaction?
Well, normally, if someone verbally attacks you, your sympathetic nervous system flares up. You get angry, defensive, you want to attack back.
Fight or flight?
Right. But if, with bone-deep certainty that their attack is 100% a symptom of their own internal suffering and fear, your reaction completely shifts.
It moves away from anger.
It moves from defensive rage to a sort of clinical, almost anthropological observation. You look at them and think, wow, they must be in an immense amount of pain to be projecting that much venom.
It naturally shifts into empathy.
Because a person who is deeply secure, happy, and at peace does not spend their time trying to destroy other people. Only someone trapped in a terrifying nightmare does that.
So by refusing to take it personally, you aren't just building a wall. You actually gain the ability to see the other person with incredible clarity.
You see the matrix.
You see the pain driving the behavior instead of just
Absolutely.
reacting to the behavior itself.
You become functionally immune to the poison. And the freedom that comes with that immunity is intoxicating. You stop twisting yourself into knots trying to manage other people's perceptions of you because you accept that their perceptions are entirely out of your control.
You just let them watch their own VR movie.
Exactly.
But, okay, if we strip away the belief that we are the cause of everyone's behavior, it leaves this massive void of understanding.
A huge void.
Because if my boss is glaring at me, and I refuse to assume it's because of my recent report, I am left with the terrifying reality that I have no idea what is going on in my boss's head. And the human brain absolutely hates a vacuum.
Oh, we despise ambiguity.
We really do.
Which is exactly why we invent stories to fill the void. And that brings us to the third agreement, which is don't make assumptions.
Don't make assumptions.
The framework identifies assumptions as the silent, invisible destroyers of relationships and peace of mind. We assume what others are thinking, we assume their intentions, and we almost universally assume the worst-case scenario.
Because we live in our own highly specific, domesticated reality, We automatically assume everyone else operates with our exact same rulebook.
We project our rules onto them.
Right. We assume they feel the way we feel and judge things the way we judge them.
There is an observation tied to this framework that is deeply profound. Most human suffering is not generated by reality, but by our misinterpreted reality.
Misinterpreted reality. Think about the sheer volume of physiological stress generated in modern society just over digital communication.
Oh, it's staggering.
Let's say you send a thoughtful, vulnerable text message to a friend. Hours pass. Finally, they reply with a single word,
Okay.
followed by a period.
The absolute punctuation mark of doom.
It really is. Immediately, your mind starts racing to fill the void of understanding. What? Okay. Why the period? They usually use exclamation points. They must be furious with me.
The spiral begins.
What did I say last week? Are they pulling away from the friendship?
Then
And you spend the next 4 hours in a state of elevated cortisol, experiencing real, memorable physiological stress.
you were actively suffering.
But you aren't suffering from reality. The reality is literally just a few pixels on a glass screen. You are suffering from the elaborate, tragic fiction you layered on top of the reality.
The assumption. Meanwhile, the actual reality could be that they were carrying a heavy box in one hand, their battery was at 1%, and they typed OK with their thumb just to acknowledge they got the message before the phone died.
Exactly.
The alternative proposed by the third agreement is simple, but it requires immense bravery. You ask questions. You seek clarity instead of guessing.
Just communicate.
You literally just text back and say, hey, the short reply made me anxious. Are we good?
But wait, isn't making assumptions literally what the human brain is built to do?
Biologically, yes.
Because in neuroscience, we talk about predictive coding. Our brains are sophisticated prediction engines. If I'm walking in the woods and I hear a sudden rustle in the bushes, my brain assumes it's a predator.
Sure.
I don't walk over to the bush and ask for clarity to avoid making an assumption. That assumption is a biological survival mechanism. It floods me with adrenaline so I can run.
Right.
So how can we be instructed to just turn off a fundamental, hardwired biological feature? Doesn't that make us naive or even put us in physical danger?
That is the exact nuance we need to explore because it's where the philosophy meets neurobiology. The goal of the third agreement is not to stop your brain from anticipating outcomes. You can't turn off predictive coding. It is your hardware. The goal is to stop treating those biological anticipations as absolute, undeniable truth without verifying them first.
Anticipation versus unquestioned conviction.
Precisely. If you hear the rustle in the bush, your brain predicts a tiger. That is a useful alarm system. The problem arises when you run back to your village screaming, there is a tiger in the woods, we must burn down the entire forest to stay safe.
Because you didn't actually see a tiger.
Right. You heard a noise, and you assumed a tiger. The third agreement asks you to notice the prediction, but hold it loosely. You say to yourself, that could be a tiger, it could also be a bird, I don't know yet.
You accept the ambiguity.
You step back cautiously, but you do not claim to know the truth until you have empirical evidence.
It requires getting really comfortable with the phrase, I don't know.
I don't know is one of the most liberating phrases in human language. When you stop assuming, you free up massive amounts of cognitive and emotional bandwidth that you previously wasted inventing and defending fictional narratives.
It's exhausting to write those scripts all day.
It is. You stop getting angry at your partner for failing to read your mind. I mean, we all know that classic toxic relationship trap, right? If they really loved me, they would just know what I need without me having to ask.
Which is an assumption that guarantees resentment.
It's a recipe for misery. No one can read your mind. When you stop assuming, you are forced to start communicating your needs clearly, and you are forced to listen to others without projecting your own baggage onto their words.
It clears the fog of war in every relationship.
It really does.
Okay, let's take inventory here. We have 3 agreements. Be impeccable with your word. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions.
Right.
Sitting here, dissecting them, they make total, undeniable, logical sense. They are clearly the blueprint for a peaceful life.
On paper, yes.
But applying them, trying to filter every word, trying to maintain emotional immunity against personal attacks, trying to short-circuit the brain's predictive coding before it spirals into anxiety.
It's a lot.
It sounds exhausting. Frankly, it sounds impossible to execute perfectly.
Yeah.
We are going to fail at this constantly.
And that is exactly why the fourth agreement exists. It acts as the structural safety net, the binding agent that makes the immense weight of the first 3 sustainable for a fallible human being.
And what is it?
The fourth agreement is always do your best.
Always do your best. But we need to redefine what your best means, because modern society has completely bastardized this concept.
Oh, absolutely. We live in a culture infected by toxic productivity, where
Mm.
we are conditioned to believe that doing your best means operating at 100% maximum capacity, peak performance, all day, every day.
Grind culture.
Exactly. But humans are not machines. We are biological organisms subject to constant internal and external fluctuations.
It makes me think of an agricultural metaphor.
Yeah.
You can't demand a maximum harvest from a field every single season.
Right. The soil depletes.
It requires fallow periods. If you force maximum output constantly, you literally destroy the field.
Hmm.
Our best is seasonal. It fluctuates wildly based on sleep, illness, grief, stress.
That's a vital way to look at it. Your best when you are fully rested, deeply happy, and physically thriving is going to look spectacular.
Obviously.
But your best when you are fighting off a virus or grieving the loss of a loved one or operating on 3 hours of sleep is going to look entirely different.
Yeah.
If you only have 20% of your normal energy reserves available and you give that full 20% to the tasks in front of you, you have still done your absolute best. You cannot logically demand 100% output from a system that is running on 20% fuel.
So the agreement isn't about achieving objective perfection. It's about consistent sincerity. It's about honest effort relative to your current capacity.
Exactly.
And doing this effectively actually prevents the accumulation of regret.
Think about what regret actually is. Psychologically, regret is the painful realization that you could have done more or acted differently, but you chose not to out of laziness, fear, or spite. If you genuinely do your best under the given circumstances, even if the project fails, even if the relationship ends, you cannot logically condemn yourself.
Because there was nothing left to give.
You can look in the mirror and say, I gave it the absolute best effort I was capable of in that moment. The inner critic is instantly stripped of its ammunition.
But the framework also warns against the opposite extreme. Doing your best specifically does not mean overworking to the point of exhaustion.
Because if you push yourself beyond your physical or emotional limits in pursuit of some idealized standard of perfection, you are no longer doing your best. You are actively destroying yourself.
Which violates the first agreement.
Exactly, because you are sinning against your own body. Doing your best fundamentally requires respecting your biological and emotional limits. By accepting that our best is a shifting target, we eliminate the vicious self-judgment that typically derails personal growth.
So if these four agreements are so deeply logical, if they so clearly relieve suffering, what is the internal force that fights so hard against us?
It's a strong force.
Why do we self-sabotage? Why is it that we can read a philosophy like this, agree with it entirely, and then go right back to gossiping and taking things personally an hour later?
To understand why we resist our own liberation, we have to look at the internal enforcers of the dream. Ruiz introduces two primary psychological forces that live inside our minds. They are the architects of our suffering.
Yeah, who are they?
He calls them the judge and the victim. If you are familiar with internal family systems therapy or even Freudian concepts of the superego and the id, you will recognize these dynamics immediately, though Ruiz frames them in a highly accessible way.
It feels like there is a relentless courtroom in session inside our heads 24/7.
The judge is that harsh, critical inner voice. It is the internalized voice of society, of your parents, of your domestication.
Oh, the husher.
Yes. Its entire function is to constantly measure you, measure other people, and measure the state of the world against a set of completely unrealistic, impossible standards. The judge is never satisfied. It enforces the rules of the dream through guilt and shame.
And the counterpart to that is the victim.
Right. If the judge is holding the gavel, the victim is the one sitting in the defendant's chair, helpless and weeping. The victim is the part of your psyche that feels constantly attacked by the unfairness of the world.
It loves a pity party.
It seeks validation, it seeks pity, and ironically, it finds comfort in the feeling of being misunderstood and mistreated because it is familiar. It says, "Poor me. I am fundamentally broken. The world is too hard, and I am powerless."
So they operate in this symbiotic infinite loop. The judge beats you up for not being perfect, and the victim cries about the beating, generating shame and helplessness, which the judge then criticizes you for.
And underneath both of these voices is the primal engine of fear. The fear of rejection, the fear of not being enough, and the fear of failure.
Let's look at how this plays out practically. Let's say you decide to practice the four agreements. You do well for a day, But then you get stressed, you snap at your partner, say something incredibly harsh, and assume they are trying to ruin your evening.
A total collapse of the system.
Exactly.
In the aftermath, the internal tag team goes to work. The judge steps up and says, look at you. You read the book, you listened to the deep dive, and you still failed. You couldn't even be impeccable with your word for 24 hours. You are a terrible partner, and you are never going to evolve.
Ouch. And then the victim takes over.
The victim chimes in and says, it's not my fault. My partner knows how stressed I am at work, and they provoked me. I have too much trauma to heal. It's just too hard for someone like me. Wash, rinse, repeat.
But how do the four agreements actually defeat these deeply ingrained neural pathways? If the judge and the victim have been running our brains since childhood, how do four rules dismantle them?
They don't fight them directly, they starve them.
Starve them.
They systematically cut off the oxygen supply to those specific neural pathways. Let's look at the mechanics of it. If you rigorously practice the second agreement and you stop taking the world's behavior personally, the victim loses its primary fuel source.
Oh, because there's no attack.
Exactly. The victim needs to feel attacked to justify its existence. If you realize that your boss's bad mood is about your boss and not about you, you aren't being attacked. The victim has nothing to cry about, and that neural pathway begins to atrophy.
That is incredible. And I imagine the fourth agreement is the ultimate weapon against the judge.
Exactly. When the judge stands up and says, you didn't achieve enough today, you're a failure, and you have genuinely practiced the fourth agreement, you can calmly reply, I acknowledge that I only had 30% in energy today, but I gave that full 30% to my tasks. I did my absolute honest best.
Checkmate.
The judge is instantly paralyzed. It has no empirical grounds to convict you. The four agreements act as a psychological firewall that prevents the judge and the victim from accessing your emotional state.
Which brings us to the ultimate question. If we commit to this, if we starve the judge and the victim, if we stop making assumptions, taking things personally, and spreading emotional poison, what does the reality on the other side actually look like?
It's beautiful, honestly.
How does this fundamentally change a person's daily experience of life?
The transformation is a total paradigm shift. It replaces fear with awareness and reaction with conscious choice.
Let's talk about the emotional benefits.
When you look at the emotional benefits, you see a massive reduction in baseline anxiety. Because think about how much of your daily anxiety is generated purely by trying to predict and control what other people think of you.
Most of it, probably.
The moment you stop taking things personally, that entire category of anxiety simply evaporates.
Your locus of control shifts entirely from the external world to your internal world.
Yes, your self-confidence is no longer anchored to external validation, which is incredibly fragile and unpredictable. Your confidence becomes rooted in your own internal integrity, and that naturally revolutionizes your social life and your relationships.
Because if you aren't relying on external validation, you stop using the people around you as mirrors to reflect your own worth back to you.
That is the crux of healthy relationships. When you stop using your partner or your friends to make you feel safe or important, you can finally just see them and love them for exactly who they are.
And the communication gets so much cleaner.
You communicate with absolute clarity because you refuse to make assumptions. Conflict plummets because you aren't taking their bad moods as personal attacks. The exhausting drama that defines so many relationships simply vanishes.
And mentally, you reclaim an astonishing amount of cognitive bandwidth. I mean, if your brain isn't running a dozen background programs trying to decode the hidden meaning of a text message or defending against the relentless attacks of the inner judge,
Which is exhausting.
you suddenly have the focus and energy to actually engage with the present moment.
What becomes clear as you observe this transformation is that the promise of the four agreements is not about acquisition.
Right. It's not like learning to code or learning a new language. You aren't adding a new skill to your personality. It is entirely a process of subtraction.
It is an unlearning.
It's an unlearning.
You are stripping away the heavy armor of domestication. The philosophy asserts a radical truth. You do not need to change the world. You do not need to fix your spouse or change your boss or wait for society to become perfectly fair.
That's a relief.
You only need to change the agreements you have made with yourself. You create internal safety, and suddenly the chaos of the external world loses its grip on you. You stop living as a victim of circumstance, and you start living as the architect of your own reality.
We have covered incredible ground today. We started by confronting the reality of the dream, recognizing that we have been domesticated by a system of rewards and punishments that installed a fear-based operating system into our minds before we could even defend ourselves.
We then explored the tools to rewrite that code. We learned to treat language with reverence, using our words as instruments of truth and creation rather than weapons of self-destruction.
We learn the immense defensive power of not taking anything personally, realizing that every person we meet is fighting battles in their own custom-built virtual reality.
We tackled the chaotic biological urge to make assumptions, choosing the bravery of saying, I don't know, and asking for clarity instead of inventing dramatic fictions.
And we bound the entire system together with the forgiving biological reality of simply doing our fluctuating, honest best, thereby permanently silencing the inner judge and the victim.
As we step back from this framework, there is a profound implication that I think is worth sitting with over the coming days.
What's that?
If your current identity, your specific fears, your insecurities, your reactions, and even the things you think you desire are largely just a collection of arbitrary agreements forced upon you by the domestication of society,
Yeah.
what happens when you finally break them?
Who is the you that is left behind when all the inherited rules are stripped away?
If you successfully apply these agreements, you are not just adopting a new self-help routine to make your workday more efficient, you are engaging in a massive psychological excavation project.
Digging down to the foundation.
You are digging through decades of legacy code to uncover the original unprogrammed version of yourself. The hardware before the corrupted software was ever installed. The authentic version of you that existed before the world told you who you were supposed to be.
Imagine living in a reality where your mind is completely free from the ghosts of other people's expectations. We started today by imagining that freedom, and now we understand that it isn't found by changing the people around us. It begins the exact moment you decide to rewrite the contract you hold with yourself. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.